Home prices in Tampa Bay soared, powered by a record flood of new arrivals, Wall Street cash, and officials declaring endless prosperity. But beneath the celebration, the Florida real estate market was a house of cards, one that's now collapsing so fast, the governor is scrambling as neighborhoods face foreclosure spikes, empty homes, and shattered dreams. How did America's system create a crash this big, and could your city be next?
Florida's population swelled at a pace not seen in decades. Between 2020 and 2022, more than 600,000 people relocated to the state, with Tampa Bay and Miami drawing the largest share. Remote workers arrived with tech salaries from the Northeast and West Coast, hunting for bigger homes and sunshine. Retirees cashed out of pricier markets, eager to stretch their savings in what was billed as a tax haven. The moving trucks kept rolling, and so did the headlines about endless demand. But beneath the surface, the entire system was running on borrowed time. Mortgage rates in 2021 dipped below 3%, the lowest in modern history. For a brief window, nearly anyone with a steady income could lock in a home loan with payments that looked manageable, at least on paper. Buyers rushed to outbid each other, sometimes waiving inspections, sometimes paying cash, sometimes stretching budgets to the breaking point. The median sale price in Tampa Bay soared past $400,000, far outpacing local wage growth. The American system made this possible. Easy money poured in from every direction, with banks and lenders eager to book new loans. Federal Reserve policy kept borrowing costs artificially low, fueling a speculative frenzy. Rents shot up too, as investors and ordinary families competed for the same shrinking supply. For many, the dream of homeownership meant betting everything on the hope that prices would keep climbing. But the cracks were there. Wages in Florida lagged behind the cost of living, especially in service and hospitality jobs. By late 2022, the gap between what people earned and what homes cost had become a chasm. The state's growth machine was running full tilt, but it was built on the assumption that cheap credit would last forever. When the cost of borrowing finally started to rise, the entire market stood exposed, over-leveraged, over-promised, and dangerously fragile.
Speculators smelled opportunity and moved in fast. Wall Street funds, private equity firms, and institutional players, names like Blackstone and Invitation Homes, quietly snapped up homes across Tampa and Miami. In neighborhoods marked by zip codes like 331XX and 336XX, corporate buyers made all-cash offers, sometimes outbidding families before a listing even hit the market. Their strategy was simple: buy in bulk, rent at a premium, and count on endless appreciation. Local realtors tracked waves of purchases by shell companies and LLCs, often registered out of state. By 2022, investor purchases in Florida's major metros were rising at double-digit rates, echoing the patterns seen before the 2008 crash. Officials and business groups cheered the influx of capital. At ribbon cuttings and real estate summits, state leaders praised the resilience of Florida's housing market and welcomed institutional investment as a sign of economic strength. Behind the scenes, industry lobbyists pressed for looser regulations and tax incentives, arguing that more buyers meant more jobs and higher property values. Local news outlets ran stories about the Florida miracle, quoting politicians who credited Wall Street's interest with keeping the state's economy humming during the pandemic recovery. But the reality on the ground was starkly different. Families found themselves competing not with neighbors, but with billion-dollar funds whose only goal was profit. Single-family homes disappeared from the market and reappeared as high-priced rentals. In some Tampa Bay zip codes, nearly 1 in 5 recent sales went to investors. The surge in speculative buying drove up prices further, pushing homeownership even farther out of reach for ordinary residents. The American system, designed to reward those with the most capital, had turned housing into a commodity, fueling a cycle where profits for a few meant pain for the many. As long as prices kept rising, the machine ran smoothly. But every boom has its limit, And with so much of Florida's housing stock now in the hands of absentee landlords and distant funds, the stage was set for a mass exodus when the math stopped working. By 2025, the cost of borrowing in Florida had reached levels that would have seemed unthinkable just a few years earlier. The average mortgage rate for new buyers hovered near 7%, more than double the rates that fueled the pandemic housing boom. For a family looking at the median Tampa Bay home, now priced around $410,000, the difference was staggering. Monthly payments that once felt manageable ballooned overnight, adding hundreds, sometimes thousands, to the cost of owning a home. First-time buyers, already squeezed by inflated prices, faced a choice between stretching their finances to the breaking point or giving up altogether. Many watched as their approval letters shrank or vanished, with banks recalculating what they could afford. Real estate agents fielded desperate calls from clients who had spent months searching, only to see their budgets wiped out by a single rate hike. The American system, designed to reward those who could borrow the most, had turned on itself. Existing homeowners felt the squeeze too. Adjustable rate mortgages reset higher, while those hoping to refinance found the door slammed shut. Carrying costs, mortgage, taxes, insurance, and fees jumped 30 to 50% in some neighborhoods compared to just 2 years earlier. For families who had bought at the peak, the numbers no longer added up. Some quietly listed their homes, hoping to cash out before prices fell further. Others clung on, watching their savings evaporate. The promise of affordable homeownership in Florida had vanished, replaced by a harsh new reality. The state's growth engine, once fueled by easy credit and low monthly payments, now ran on fumes. For thousands of would-be buyers and stretched homeowners, the American dream was slipping out of reach, one rate increase at a time. Insurance was supposed to be the last safety net for Florida homeowners, but it collapsed when people needed it most. In February 2023, United Property and Casualty, a major insurer, filed for bankruptcy. Over 130,000 policies vanished overnight, leaving families exposed just as hurricane season loomed. Calls flooded state offices, but regulators could only scramble to patch the holes. The state's insurer of last resort, Citizens, was already stretched thin. Each week brought more desperate applications, but the backlog grew. Hundreds waited in limbo, unable to close on homes, refinance, or even renew their mortgages because no private company would touch Florida's risk. Inside Citizens, a new problem surfaced. The company had quietly rolled out an artificial intelligence tool to process storm claims, promising faster results. But whistleblowers leaked internal emails showing the system was designed to minimize payouts. Homeowners who lost roofs or saw water pour through their ceilings found themselves offered a fraction of the repair costs. Some received checks for less than the deductible. The AI flagged claims for review, then buried them in red tape. Regulators watched as complaints piled up, but their hands were tied. The insurance market had become a game of musical chairs, and the music had stopped. For many, the loss of coverage was the final blow. Without insurance, banks threatened foreclosure. Some owners walked away, unable to sell or even give their homes back. Entire neighborhoods saw for sale signs multiply as the risk spread from one house to the next. The collapse of insurance didn't just threaten property values. It tore at the fabric of communities, exposing a system that had promised protection but delivered chaos instead. Condominium owners across Florida opened their mailboxes to find envelopes containing numbers that felt like a punch to the gut. After the Surfside collapse, lawmakers rushed through sweeping new safety rules. Any condo building 3 stories or higher, once it hit 30 years old, or 25 near the coast, now faced mandatory milestone inspections and a structural integrity reserve study. The goal was to prevent another disaster, but the fallout landed hardest on the people least able to pay. In Tampa Bay, retirees like Donna Alvarez, living on a fixed income, suddenly owed $85,000 for emergency repairs and reserve funding. Her building's board, hands tied by the law, called a meeting in the rec room. The mood was tense. Some owners wept, others shouted at the board, demanding answers. The association's president read from the engineer's report: cracked support columns, corroded rebar, water intrusion that had been ignored for years. The SIRS rules meant no more kicking the can down the road. Every dollar needed to be collected immediately. Special assessments swept through Miami and Tampa like a storm. In some buildings, bills topped $120,000 per unit. Owners who had just scraped together enough for a down payment found themselves blindsided by costs they could never hope to cover. Board emails, later leaked, captured the desperation. "We have no choice," one wrote. "If we don't pay, the county will shut us down." The hardest hit were older residents who had counted on Florida as their safe landing. Many had nowhere to turn. Banks refused to lend for assessments. Some tried to sell, only to discover buyers wouldn't touch a unit facing six-figure repair bills. Foreclosure notices began to arrive, not just for missed mortgages, but for unpaid assessments. The American system had promised security and sunshine. Now, it was delivering heartbreak, one envelope at a time.
Foreclosure notices multiplied across Tampa Bay, arriving in mailboxes faster than boards or banks could process the paperwork. By early 2025, filings in some neighborhoods had spiked 200% compared to just 2 years before. In zip codes like 33610 and 33619, entire blocks saw homes slip from owners to lenders almost overnight. Bank REO agents, once a rare sight, became regulars at local title offices, shuffling paperwork for properties no one wanted to touch. The only signs of movement came from moving trucks, their drivers logging address after address in ledgers that told a story of flight. Lisa Morales, who runs a family-owned moving company in Hillsborough County, watched her records flip. By the end of 2023, outbound moves made up 70% of her business, a complete reversal from the pandemic boom. Empty houses lined the streets, grass growing wild, windows papered with code violation notices. Neighbors who remained described the silence as eerie. Once thriving cul-de-sacs now hollowed out, playgrounds abandoned, mail piling up in rusted boxes. In some stretches, only the bank's lockboxes and a scattering of for sale signs broke the monotony. Local schools and small businesses felt the impact too, as enrollment dropped and storefronts shuttered. The economic shock rippled outward, pulling at the threads of entire communities. For families forced to leave, the process was swift and unforgiving. Some packed up in the dead of night, hoping to avoid the embarrassment of foreclosure. Others left behind furniture and memories, unable to afford movers or storage. The data kept by moving companies and banks painted a grim picture. Florida's promise of stability had collapsed into a scramble for the exit. The American system, built to reward speculation and short-term gain, was now gutting the very neighborhoods it once claimed to uplift. And as the exodus spread from Tampa Bay to other corners of the state, the crisis was no longer just local. It was becoming a warning for the rest of the country.
The marble halls of the Florida Capitol echoed with raised voices as lawmakers packed into an emergency session. The agenda was chaos. Skyrocketing property taxes, vanishing insurance, and a housing market in free fall. Realtor lobbyists, pressed into every corner, handed out talking points and warnings about economic disaster if property values kept dropping. County budget chiefs, clutching spreadsheets, pleaded for stable tax revenues to keep schools and emergency medical services running. One lawmaker waved a stack of foreclosure notices, declaring, "This is what happens when you let Wall Street run wild and ignore working families." On the House floor, debate spun out of control. A Miami representative read emails from constituents who had lost insurance overnight. Across the aisle, a Tampa lawmaker demanded tax relief for homeowners, while a senator from Pinellas County warned that slashing property taxes would force layoffs of teachers and firefighters. Realtor Association spokespeople insisted that the answer was to build more, deregulate faster, and let the market sort itself out. County officials shot back that without a functioning tax base, basic services would collapse, garbage would not get picked up, and hurricane shelters would go unfunded. In committee rooms, the scene was no less frantic. Lobbyists for developers and insurers huddled with lawmakers, pushing amendments and trading barbs with consumer advocates. Journalists caught snippets of hallway arguments. "If you cap taxes, you gut our schools. If you do not, you will drive out every homeowner left." By the end of the week, little had been settled. No one agreed on who should pay or how to patch the holes left by vanished tax revenue and insurance. The session ended with a stack of half measures and a promise to revisit the crisis. Outside, the lobbyists packed up, already preparing for the next round. Inside, the sense of paralysis lingered. A government caught between lobbyists, local officials, and a public running out of patience. Institutional investors, once the loudest cheerleaders of Florida's housing boom, began to vanish from the market. In Fort Lauderdale, investor home purchases dropped by 21% in a single quarter. Orlando saw a 25% decline. Miami, long a magnet for Wall Street funds and private equity, recorded a 19% fall. The buy-to-rent giants who had once outbid families for single-family homes now raced to unload their portfolios. For sale signs multiplied in neighborhoods where corporate buyers had dominated just a year before. Instead of bidding wars, agents fielded calls from hedge fund managers desperate to liquidate, even at a loss. Behind closed doors, risk analysts pored over flood maps and climate forecasts. Unpublished FEMA drafts for Miami-Dade showed entire swaths flagged as high risk, with property values projected to drop sharply if the data went public. Local officials lobbied to keep the maps out of sight, fearing a panic that would crater city budgets and send investors fleeing faster. But whispers spread through financial circles. The models predicted another 10 to 15% fall in home prices by the end of 2026. The market's confidence had evaporated. What looked like a local crisis was now a warning shot for the nation. The same Wall Street firms that had fueled Florida's boom were now the first to pull out, leaving behind a glut of unsold homes and a contagion of fear. The American system, built on opacity and short-term profit, had left entire communities exposed. As capital fled, the risk of collapse no longer stopped at Florida's borders. In 2023, over 130,000 Floridians lost property insurance overnight when United Property and Casualty collapsed, and Tampa Bay saw foreclosure rates spike by 200% in the hardest-hit zip codes. This documentary has shown how a decade of speculative buying, record-low mortgage rates, and mass migration set the stage for today's crisis. Institutional investors, who once drove the boom, cut purchases by 19 to 25% in Miami, Orlando, and Fort Lauderdale by mid-2025. Despite emergency legislative sessions and public pledges, core issues, like unreleased FEMA risk data and the sustainability of Florida's insurance system, remain unresolved. While official documents confirm growing distress, the full social and economic fallout is still unfolding. What is certain? The cycle of boom, risk, and collapse was built into the system itself, and unless the root causes are addressed, more American cities may face similar upheaval.